I'm the administrative assistant at Milestones, but I've been speaking with them and volunteering with them since 2012, so very excited to get to be a part of the actual team. My goal for presenting today, sensory issues are one of my biggest passions to talk about because it's something that I experience a lot. So when I created this presentation a year ago and got the chance to work with two other people whose sensory needs are completely different than mine, it was very exciting because it means we get to show you a whole range of what sensory needs look like.
Oh, thank you. My name is Grace Blatt. As Nathan so lovely said, I work for the Cuyahoga Board of Developmental Disabilities as a Good Life Ambassador. So as a Good Life Ambassador, I speak and present to different organizations about advocacy and inclusion of not just people with autism, but with all disabilities. I also am at Lakeland Community College, and I'm in a partnership program with Cleveland State in hopes to get my BA in psychology, and eventually I want to be one of the first women psychologists who has autism in the state of Ohio. So I look forward to that. And my goal for presenting today is to help you get into the minds of us and help you understand that that sensory needs differ so greatly, and there's so a diverse amount of what one stimuli may be soothing for someone else, and at the same time may be agitating for another person. So it's really interesting, and I hope you learn something.
And I've done a lot of speaking already, but my name is Nathan. I'm the Early Intervention School Age Coordinator at Milestones, so I may have worked with quite a few of you through the help desk or through some of the other Milestones programs. I did my undergrad at Kent State, where I studied psychology and Japanese, special interest of mine. I also had some background teaching and tutoring Japanese. I have my master's degree in social work, and I'm looking forward to eventually someday going back for my PhD in autism. I'd like to further study and expand on the field. That's just a long-term plan, though. I don't know how that's going to materialize. My goal for presenting today is really just to share about my own personal experiences in the hopes that they may in some way help you or your loved ones in some small way to navigate these sensory experiences, but then also to create a more inclusive society for people with autism. We are just going to kind of go over just a little bit of what sensory processing is for those who don't know. Sensory processing is just a really broad topic. Pretty much, to put it very plainly, anything that we perceive in our environment is something that we're sensing. So you usually have the main 5 ones that are discussed. Almost everyone knows these ones: vision, sound, smell, taste, touch. But there are a lot of others. You will see that the 6th sense is not seeing ghosts, but it's actually, there's no real actual order for the remaining senses. They're just still discussed and debated and studied. But there are a lot of areas where people will have differences in sensory processing, so it's helpful to keep in mind that it's not necessarily just those 5 senses. It may be things like balance or temperature or other sensory sensations. So when we're talking about sensory processing, we do need to be aware of that it can impact a wide range of experiences. It also does make it difficult to support in some ways, unfortunately. So this is also something that has been of particular interest to, I know, myself and Molly, and we've had some discussions and topics about it, but there aren't a whole lot of evidence-based interventions for sensory processing. That's not to say, there's reasons for that. It's really just because it's really difficult for scientists to study. Because our sensory, and you'll soon hear, our sensory experiences are quite different from one another. While we do have a lot of similarities, there are some substantial differences, so it can make it hard to compare and contrast. So that makes studies difficult to replicate. It's also difficult to get sample sizes for these types of studies. But what we do have are what are considered best practice models. That just means it's a tried and true method. It means that professionals have been using it for a while, and it seems to show some benefit. So we do rely on professionals for that. They are safe. The only real cost is really there might be an insurance aspect, but something that I would like to emphasize is that best practice models should still be science-driven. It shouldn't just be some random thing that someone came up with one day. It should have some level of studying. But also, a lot of these best practice models are not accessible to adults. So many of the occupational therapy interventions will not be covered by any of our insurance. Other sensory type interventions, we won't be able to access through our insurance just because it's not something that insurance views as being something that they want to pay for. So we've had to find our own strategies outside of the medical models, particularly as we have become adults. And so now we're just going to talk about our personal experiences.
Alright, so I'm going to start with my sensory profile. So there are two facets, really. There's a hyper and a hypo, and basically, in how I feel describes it best, hyper means it's something that you feel intensely that you want to get away from, that's too much, and hypo is something that you, sorry, I just spit my tongue, seek out and try to access. So for me, my hypersensitivities, I have a lot of ones that have to do with sound. I have very bad auditory processing issues. I can't listen when there's more than one person talking at once because it sounds horrible. So I have to blur it in my head or try to pick out like each individual voice. I also really don't like the shushing noise. That's one of my biggest sensory issues. Fun fact, my mom was a librarian growing up, and I worked in libraries, so I constantly heard it, and it was something that would cause me to pinch and scratch myself. It still does to this day, or like even hit myself in the head if it was too bad. So that's one of my really biggest hypersensitivities. And then I would say I also have some texture issues. Like a couple years ago, I had to completely give away all my clothing and get new ones because I suddenly couldn't touch any of the fabric that I used to be able to. So that is like some weird thing. Also, the fact that it can fluctuate within your own sensory needs. And then some hyposensitivities. I really like the wind, which is interesting because that's one of Nathan's hypersensitivities. He hates it. So that's another good, really prime example. But I love the way it feels on your skin. I also have like a favorite type of concrete that I just like the way it sounds when you step on it or like rub your foot on it. So those are kind of things I seek out. I also really seek out deep pressure when I'm upset because that just helps. That just feels very good when it gives me something kind of to focus on when I'm having issues.
Hello, one of my hypersensitivities is that I have perfect pitch, or I have near perfect pitch, where I'm able to hear things at a certain, hear certain notes and things like that. Now, what perfect pitch simply means is that if you're playing a song or if you hit a note on the keyboard and I can say, oh, that's a D flat or that's a D minor, or if you say sing off D flat, I can pull it out of the air and sing it. So a lot of the times I have to sight read music, and so that can be a blessing and a curse because every time I hear noise or like this hum of the air conditioning, it's in the key of B flat, and so when I hear that, I'm like, and so I think in those terms. And so another hypersensitivity is I hear everything at the same decibel. So I hear the fans the same decibel I'm hearing myself speak. I hear crinkling of paper, sometimes people moving around, things like that, all at the same decibel. So people are always like, how can you hear that, Grace? And I said, well, I hear everything at the same decibel. One of my hyposensitivities is I'm attracted to crinkling paper. I love ribbons, I love tassels. It's a sensory thing. I usually feel them like this, like a paper, like a flag. And then I really enjoy tassels. In fact, the biggest thing at my high school graduation was getting all the regalia and all the tassels for my involvement, and so that was more important to me than the diploma. So it was very fun to do that, and so those are some of my hyper and hypo sensitivities.
I also wanted to share, so we've not actually done this before with our sensory presentation, but we just wanted to give Grace the opportunity. So I was actually, Molly and I had attended Grace's birthday not but a few weeks ago, and she just shared with us one of her amazing talents that really does tie into some of her sensory issues. But I think it also has become sort of a strength for Grace. She's a very talented singer. So I think she just wanted to share just a brief excerpt, I guess, something like that,
yes.
of a song that she likes to sing, if you guys are okay with that.
So this is the Ave Maria from Schubert. So I'll sing a little bit of it for you. Ave Maria.
That sensory issues have to always be a negative, but Grace, because of her perfect pitch and because of her dedication to music, she's really been able to practice and hone that. So thank you so much for sharing that. I know that was probably a little.
No, I like singing that.
I just wanted everyone to be able to hear how fantastic Grace is with her singing.
Thank you.
So it's actually my turn. Okay, it was just I still processing that for a minute.
Sorry.
My sensory profile, as Molly had shared, she really likes the wind. I actually, if I could just stop the wind altogether, that would be fantastic. It often feels like, to me, like I'm getting little paper cuts on my face and on my skin. While I like the effects that it's a cooling breeze, I do like that it cools the environment. I do not like the feel of it on my skin at all. So I actually have a lot of issues with temperature and with touch. I like really firm, heavier touches. So for example, I am always dressed pretty unseasonably warm. You'll very rarely, unless it's a threat to my health, see me outside of a longer sleeve shirt. Just because I like the weight that has on my arms. That has the added benefit of helping to protect my arms from things like the wind that are unpleasant to me. Downside is I'm very hypersensitive to temperature. So I get really overstimulated the warmer it gets. I find myself having a harder time thinking. I start to feel confused. I start to feel a little panicky. So this time of year tends to be the time where I would actually prefer to lock myself away in the house with the AC blasting. And I'll talk a little bit later about some of the strategies that I've used for that. But I just think that it's kind of interesting how I have two sensory experiences that go together and actually can create a super sensory overstimulation experience by needing that more deeper, heavier touch, as well as that temperature sensitivity. So sensory issues can play off of each other and can expand and make it more unpleasant. So next, I think we're going to talk about some of this. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention texture. Texture is actually probably my biggest, one of my other biggest issues. Lots of people with autism will have difficulties with food. My diet consists almost entirely of liquids. And while I have been making attempts to include more solid foods in my diet, that is especially difficult when I'm anxious or tired. I'm also a vegetarian, So it's been very difficult to find vegetarian options that aren't smoothies out and about in the community. So for example, a lot of people will talk about their freshman 15. I was always chronically underweight when I was a kid because I just wouldn't eat. Now as an adult, I discovered the various smoothie locations. If you guys are familiar with those, it's essentially 3,000 calories of sugar with fruit flavoring. My freshman 15 turned into the freshman 150, and so since undergrad I've gained about 150 pounds. So through some of the strategies I've been using, I've been able to stop the weight gain, but now it's just a matter of trying to reverse it. So those are probably the two biggest, the temperature, or the three biggest, the temperature, the weight, like the weight of clothing and such, not the body weight. I know that that could have been confusing, but also temperature. So we're going to start talking about some of the strategies that didn't work for us first, so that you can kind of hear those, and then we would like to end on a positive note about the things that did work for us.
So the biggest thing that did not work for me was the fact that I was not allowed to stim in public. I was diagnosed later. I was diagnosed in 6th grade, so part of it, my family just thought I was being weird, so they were like, stop doing that. And then later when we learned what it was, they just didn't want me to look different because I can often pass as neurotypical, and I think they wanted me to be able to do that as much as possible. So that would cause huge issues because we would be in a store and I wouldn't be allowed to rock or flap my hands a little bit. So when we got home, I ended up having a meltdown instead because I was really trying to not stim, and that just caused me to get overstimulated even more. So that's something that, as an adult, I'm very grateful that I'm getting more comfortable doing in public because it really does reduce the amount of meltdowns I have once I get home and have to take off the neurotypical mask or camouflage that I put on myself. And another thing that really doesn't work for me are calming techniques. When I'm getting upset about a sensory issue, the worst thing you can do is like tell me it'll be okay or try to stop me from having the reaction I'm having to it, because I can't help it. It can be either an intense amount of pain almost, or like when I have something touch me that I don't like, my skin burns. I can feel it burning, and like sometimes marks appear just because to me it really, that's what it feels like. So when people try to stop me from having those reactions, like just let me get over with it. Once I get it over with, it'll be done, and I can continue on. So not getting the time to really pause and process the sensory issues isn't great either.
And one of the strategies that hasn't worked for me, I've been constantly in occupational therapy, group therapy, and things like that. And one of the things that has not worked for me is that group therapy has never worked for me. I've always felt like I've been in competition ever since I started with group therapy, not competition with necessarily the teacher or the instructor, but with my peers. And so peer pressure for neurotypical people is bad enough. Peer pressure with autistic people is like triple the intensity. And so all these autistic people want to be neurotypical, or they want to act as neurotypical as possible. So I would always have the feeling like, oh, she said something a little bit inappropriate. I'm going to see if I can make a joke out of it or act more neurotypical, or I can do the skill, the occupational, like squeeze the ball harder or something like that. So I felt very uncomfortable being compared or seeing other people's progress over mine, because it was almost like who was impressing the teacher the best, who was doing and I know the teacher, that wasn't the goal of occupational therapy, but that's how it came across in my mind, and that's mainly why a lot of the times most of the time I would end up faking my abilities and not being able to really express myself through like drawing and using my fine motor skills and things like that. I would just try to copy or do something that wouldn't be truly me, and try to imitate or do something that one of my fellow therapy clients were doing. And so it was very exhausting. And another a strategy that did not work for me is when I am having a meltdown, whatever the cause. I do not like when people touch me or give me a hug. It's very, I almost get a sense of hotness, like a fever it feels like. And when people try to hug me and say, oh, it's okay, I'd rather have you use your words and say, let's talk about this, let's sit down and talk about this. I don't need a lot of like, oh, come here, let me hug you, or things like that, or a pat on the back. I find that very disturbing and very like invasive. And so those are the strategies that did not work for me. Oh, God.
I'm borrowing Molly's. So there are quite a few strategies that I've tried over the years that absolutely haven't worked for me. So mentioning earlier, switching over to pretty much an all-liquid diet, while that did allow me to eat and feel some level of comfort and no fuss with my routine, it has had some negative health effects. So while that was a coping strategy that I used, it wasn't a particularly good one. Something else, so I'm gonna grab one of these, kind of covering stuff. So I actually go to Starbucks and I will grab these stoppers. Is anyone familiar with Lemony Snicket, Violet Baudelaire, how she'll tie her hair back into, and that helps her focus? I'll use, and I think I'm just doing a Starbucks advertisement right now. Hopefully I'll get some free coffee out of this. So with the stoppers that I'll use, sometimes people will walk into the office and I'll have one in my mouth, and that does help me focus, it helps me calm. That's a sensory seeking behavior, so that's a hyposensitivity that I have. The downside to using those types of oral soothing techniques is I've actually chipped a tooth and things like that. Sticking hard plastic in your mouth is probably not the best idea, especially if you do it routinely. So I might have to get some dental work done to attend to that. But so a lot of the strategies that I've used have been successful, but they've had very negative effects as well. So that's something that I like to try to highlight is we often just do the best that we can with what we have, and we're constantly looking for that next thing that may be just slightly better, trying to find the option that causes the least amount of harm to us. The absolute strategies that I think haven't worked is even just trying to push through it. So for example, even yesterday, and I'm just going to use this as an example, I was getting a little overstimulated because of some crowds and noise and heat and just different things throughout the day. And I was just trying to get to the next task, get through the next task, and just trying to ignore the feelings that I had. And I think that can be a pretty common response if we're just trying to move on to that next thing, and hopefully that it'll end. And that actually ended up resulting in a pretty uncomfortable, even more unpleasant experience, because I was so jittery, so jumpy, that I squeezed a whole thing of lemonade all over myself. So it made it a little bit worse. But fortunately, there was another woman who I work with who was really able to help me kind of slow it down and regroup. And so I know I'm kind of stepping into this next one, but I'll pass it over to Molly after this. I think one of the things that people can really do to help is just knowing the individual that you're working with or that you're supporting, and just knowing what works best to help calm them. So for example, this coworker of mine, she just said, "Hey Nathan, what can I do to help?" And that was probably the most beneficial support anyone could have really offered for me personally, is really just asking, what can I do to help? Not, here, let me do this for you, because that probably would have been, I would have received, oh, I got it, I'm fine, I'll do this. It was, so that was just really touching to me, so I just wanted to share that. But I'm going to pass it over to Molly so she can start talking more about the strategies that have been helpful.
Okay, so like I mentioned before, stimming, being able to stim in public has helped me immensely. And just telling myself, who cares if you rock? It's cool, like, do it. It'll make your life so much easier. So that was a really big one. The other, one of the other things, I love sensory toys. They help me out a lot. So like, I wear one as a bracelet. I keep one on the wheel of my car, so like in traffic, I'll like be able to just kind of play with it while focusing, and it helps me. And so I really love that just something, it doesn't have to be a sensory toy, but just knowing that there's an object that I can take with me that grounds me really, really helps me. Especially because it is something that's unobtrusive and especially as an adult, it can be, our coping methods might look weird to other people. It's not cute like when you're a kid, it's just weird at this point sometimes. So the fact that I'm able to figure out ways I can do it that make me not feel so obvious helps as well. And a really big thing that helps me is being able to control some aspect of the situation. Like I'm able to get tattoos. I listen to my music at the highest level in my car. But if I was not the one controlling those situations, I would not be able to do it. I can listen to the same exact song at the same exact volume in someone else's car and have a meltdown because of it, because I'm not the one who chose it. I'm not the one who has the ability to turn it off if I need to. So that's being just able to put even just a small bit of input into the situation really, really helps me cope. And the third one is really the fact that my support people know what to do. My husband is starting to learn the difference between what's a happy rock and what's like an agitated rock, and what to do versus what not to do in each scenario. And it's probably a really long, nuanced list, but he really makes it a point to stick to it and know how to help me best, I think.
So I'm going to talk a little bit without the microphone for a minute. Okay, thank you. One of the things is one of the strategies I use is called buzzies. Now these things, I'm going to pass them around, and they are vibrating little, you can attach them to your watch, they can clip on, and they have alternating vibrating vibrations. And so what you used to do, what this is called is neurofeedback. Now neurofeedback is used to be like a big machine, and you would have to put electrodes on your head, and you would have to sit for hours on end just waiting for the neurofeedback to buzz. It's not like an electrical shock, it's just literally a vibration. Zzz, 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 zzz. And so now there's a doctor in California, Dr. Sarin, and she has come up with these buzzies. If you go to buzzies.com, BUZZIES, and I'm going to pass these around, and you can change the frequency, the intensity, and the overlap. It has a phone, and I'm going to start them, and you can pass them around. So you can wear them as long as on either side of your body. It will work, because there's something about the neuroscience that helps them work correctly, and helps stimulate the brain and make you less anxious or less worried about things. It also organizes your executive functioning of your brain. Another strategy that worked for me is called the Moore reflex. MORO. Well, it's actually called the Moore reflex exercise, and it's based on a reflex that is supposed to be extinguished by the age of 4 as a child. And so one of the like for instance, the sucking reflex. Babies usually suck on everything they see and things like that. If you put your finger in their hand, they'll close it right away. That's called the Darwinian grasp. I always joke with Molly, because Molly's cat is named Darwin, and he always grasps you when he comes, so I call him the Darwinian grasp cat. And so, but that's actually what it's called, the Darwinian grasp. And so one of the other reflexes is called the Moore reflex, and that's called the startle reflex. And the startle reflex is simply when you hold a baby up, and it will go, ah, or ah, and it will get all excited because it wasn't expecting you to hold the baby up in the air. And so the Moore reflex the exercise is meant to help people with anxiety, with unexpected changes, with helping them with schedule changes, unpredictable. So I'm going to show you a quick exercise. If you can hold this, I'll just grab a chair right here. So you do it sitting, I'll do it in the middle so everyone can see. You do it in the middle, and you start out like a starfish. and then I've done this for a month, and it's really helped me organize my executive functioning. So you start out like a starfish, and then you cross your right hand over your left hand, and your right foot over your left foot, and tuck in your chin for 5 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, open back up. And then go left over left, left over right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then open. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you do 5 on each side. So you do right and left on either side. And I did that for about a month every day for 5 minutes. And it worked. It helped me relax. And it's one way that you can use non-medication to non-medical input to help you ease anxiety and the executive functioning of your brain. And now Nathan would like to talk about his strategies that work for him.
So with the buzzies thing, I just want to say that one of the things that I have found particularly difficult as well that I didn't mention is vibration. So, so it's always important to make sure that if you are trying to use some kind of a support, that it is actually specifically tailored. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. So this is a story I've shared before, but I still joke about it with my mom. So when I was younger and I was working on like yard work, different tasks, we actually, one of the supports that I did so that I would be able to deal with that vibration aspect of things wasn't so much the noise of that bothered me, it was more so the vibration of the mower, is we would wrap beach towels or bath towels around the handle on the lawnmower with a lot of duct tape. And then I would go out in oven mitts on both hands and I would mow the yard. And it probably looked really ridiculous. I still think, looking back on it, how funny that must have been to some of the neighbors. But it worked for me and it gave me a level of independence. And so, as Molly had said, if there's something that's a support, and even if it may look kooky or weird to other people, I say go ahead and do it. If it works for you, do it. What does it matter what other people think? Beyond that, in recent years, I found that I've been able to use a manual mower, those old-timey ones from like the 1920s where there's no motor, it's just a blade, and you just push it right over. They don't work very well, but they work enough. And then in recent months, I've actually decided to just outsource the neighbor's kid. It's $12 a week. It saves me the hassle. So yeah, I actually finding independent living was something that was important to me, and it was something that I had built and worked towards for a long time. So throughout my undergrad and my master's degree program, I did live with my mom. And I lived in an apartment for 1 year after graduating, just because I got kind of tired. I was originally driving to go to school about 2 hours, and then with traffic, sometimes even 2.5 hours, 3 hours. With traffic, I was hitting rush hour traffic in Cleveland, in Akron, in Canton. It was quite a mess. But independent living was something that was important to me. But I did have a hard time, so when I was looking for apartments, I did have to find a place that had air conditioning. I did have to be aware of the environment that I would be moving into. So I know that we have a lot of people who may have older children or adult children who might be working towards independent living, just keeping in mind what their housing a place may look like and if that's able to accommodate the sensory needs that they have. Or even in your own home, if you have a young child, just being aware of what the child's sensory needs are and how can you accommodate or account for those within your own home. Because often for me, my house is my sanctuary. It's where I get overstimulated throughout the day, but at the end of the day, I can keep my lights clicked off. So I actually moved from my house recently into an apartment because my rent was going to go up. It was actually a cheaper option, but it gave me a lot more control over my environment. But my neighbors, I found out recently, thought that I was never home because my lights are never on in the house. So I've added a bunch of features. So I have a Nest thermostat, so I can make sure that I'm keeping control of the temperature in my house. Winter's fine because I can actually just keep the windows almost cracked, and then I just have to worry about the pipes freezing. But with the Nest thermostat in the summer, I can adjust it before I even head home, so I don't have astronomically large heating bills like I might otherwise have. Beyond that, I also have a car with remote start. So I used to have to ask my mom or classmates or other people to go start my car for me while I was inside. Because otherwise I'd be very overstimulated, and that's a recipe for disaster, being super overstimulated and then getting behind the wheel of a car. So having that remote start has given me a lot more freedom, a lot more independence just in my ability to travel where I'd like, or so that I don't have to start my car in the grocery store parking lot and then run inside and wait while it cools off. So I've used a lot of technology supports, and I think we do have a lot of really nice things. There are dimmer lights that you can get for most houses. There are sound machines. There are so many different technology supports that I think are available to explore as options, and many of them are becoming increasingly more affordable. Beyond that, I've relied very heavily on my support system. So my mom has been my biggest source of support. It wasn't always an easy process, but she was actually, I think, the one who helped me identify what some of my main triggers were, because when you're younger, you don't necessarily have that level of insight into why a behavior is occurring or what's causing you to feel upset. So I think those are probably the main things that I've used, that technology support, and just having people who are supportive around me. And then, yeah, that's all I have. So we actually have some time set aside for questions.